Hello, my name is Daniel Simon. This year marks the 10th anniversary of the anthology Business Architecture Management, Architecting the Business for Consistency and Alignment. As the editor of the book, now that it's 10 years later, I'm revisiting some chapters with their contributors, well, to reflect a little and also look at things that might have evolved since then. Today, I do have the pleasure of having a conversation with Bas van Gils. Welcome, Bas, and
Thank
thanks
you.
for making this possible and, well, having a chat with me today.
Of course, more than happy to help.
So, first of all, Bas, let's start with a very quick intro of yourself. Could you maybe share a few highlights about you and what you've been doing over the years?
Yeah, of course. So maybe it's good to start at the beginning. I have a very mixed background. A master's in information management and technology from the economics department, and a PhD from the computer science department at another university also, by the way. So I've always been back and forth between business and IT, so to speak. And that mixed background also helps me to navigate the levels of complexity between strategy and execution, which I think is very relevant to our field. Done pretty much everything from developing software systems to information analysis, architecture, strategy work, and all the way back. So that's more or less what I've been doing on the practical side for the last 20, 25 years, more or less. And next to that, I also have an academic side to my work. Um, I taught various architecture courses around mostly Europe, but also outside of Europe a little bit. Now I'm a professor at Antwerp Management School, which I'm very proud of. And the third thing I think is relevant to this discussion is that I'm also involved with DEMA Netherlands, where I try to tie together results from academia and challenges in the real world.
Great. So, thanks for your little intro, Bas. So the chapter that you contributed to the book, Bas, was basically about, well, building agile enterprises. So that was kind of the key theme. Today, maybe even more significant than 10 years ago, right? So now, without diving into the specific approach that you presented in the book chapter, could you maybe talk a little about, well, what the role of architecture in general and, well, specifically business architecture is to help realize this from your point of view, to make enterprises more agile? So, how can business architecture help increase the agility of an organization?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in that question. And my thinking has evolved a lot over the last 10 years. So 10 years ago, that was 2015, that was pre-COVID, right? So try to imagine what the world looked like back then. It's completely different from where we are today. So I'll try to pick a few key themes and answer your question.
Mhm.
First thing is, I'm increasingly disliking everyone who puts an adjective or a modifier in front of the word architect. So business architect, no, out the door. The whole point of an architect is to have that broad perspective on challenges that we face as an organization.
Mhm.
And sure, we all have our specialization. I understand. Someone who really takes, let's say, business perspective will call himself business architect. And someone who takes, basically starts at the data will probably call themselves data architect. I can live with that as long as you keep that broad perspective. The whole idea is to have that understanding of the fundamental properties of the organization, principles guiding design and
Mhm.
evolution. We've all heard the definition, but keep that broad perspective in mind. So that's one of the things that has really changed for me in the last 10 years, I want to say. Second is also the assumption that we all want to be agile. It's an assumption. And sure, many organizations claim that they want to be agile. We need to respond to technological changes. Here in Europe, we are now worried about the whole data sovereignty part. So we have to be able to adapt to that and all those things. Sure, agility has its perks, but we have to remember that the opposite of agility, let's say it's difficult to come up with a name from the top of my head, like really optimizing for performance and throughput and all those first time right and all those things. That also has its advantages. So the second thing I think that has changed for me personally is to take that step back and have a broader perspective and say, okay, everyone is screaming agility, but what about the opposite? And I always try to find the polarized opposite view, and see what's really going on. What is it that we really want to achieve here? And maybe go against the stream and say what everyone is talking about might not be the best idea to move forward. So that's the second part I want to say that has changed a lot. I also teach that in my courses, and I see a lot of people resonating to that. And we shouldn't ask the question, can we do X, Y, or Z? But we should ask the question, is it a good idea to do X, Y, or Z? And that requires a more strategic view, I want to say.
Mhm. Okay, yeah. I think as you said yourself, we could keep discussing this well for way more time. But I'd like to move to another topic with you, somewhat closer to what has become, I think, a major area of interest and work for you in recent years. So, as you know, in enterprise architecture, well, you touched on this with what you said just a minute ago. It's quite common to distinguish between different layers, right? Most often, those layers will not only include business architecture, but also application architecture and technology architecture. Well, and of course, we should not forget about data, right? So what about data architecture? How does that fit into this picture? What is data architecture about it all? And what's kind of the key relationship to business architecture then? Yeah.
Uh, Again, there's a lot to
It is.
unpack here, but let's give it a go.
Yeah.
So, if you look at data, is something that we didn't talk about much for the last 10 years. I want to
Hmm.
say it's really ramping up in the last 3, 4, 5 years, more or less. And you can look at data from various angles. Again, the architecture perspective, the data management perspective, the whatever perspective you come up with. In the field of data management, I want to say that the DAMA DMBOK is the industry reference work, and there it's claimed that data architecture is about two things. One is understanding the enterprise's need for data, and two, creating blueprints to address those needs. Okay, that's fine. That sort of fits with how we see data architecture as architects.
Hmm.
Then I think there's a group, a school of thought that says, yeah, here we have the whole enterprise. There's data in there somewhere. So data architecture is, well, the fundamental properties of the data landscape and the principles guiding design and evolution, whatever that may mean. And people will have a different perspective. Probably we can model it out using Archimate, ERD, data flows, whatever. Then I think the third school of thought that we see a lot is data architecture is it's more about governance. Say, let's
Hmm.
move to data mesh, where you have these local data teams that take responsibility and accountability for data products, whether they're OLAP or OTAP, whether analytical or just transactional. So there is no uniform definition of what data architecture is, unfortunately. So now, in an attempt to answer your question, as I said, I really think everyone who puts an adjective or a modifier in front of the word architecture should be taken out and, well, maybe not shot, but still get some kind of punishment. I think data architecture, if you do data architecture, it means putting on glasses where you look at the enterprise and data is the starting point of the analysis. Data is still meaningless if we don't connect it to processes and people and systems that in which data resides. And there are a ton of challenges if you take that perspective. So to me, that's what data architecture is about.
Hmm. Okay. So I'm gonna keep referring to it as data
That's okay.
architecture. So please don't
No,
punish
no, no,
me. Yeah? So
no,
at
no.
least for today, I'm gonna do so. And as you said, Bas, data architecture itself is nothing new, yeah. But well, I guess, and that's kind of what you described, yeah. It has become an architectural area of maybe more importance, yeah, than years ago, yeah. And why is that the case? What's kind of the relevance of data in today's architecture work? Yeah? And how do you see it being practiced as opposed to, let's say, 10 years ago?
Yeah, if you look at history, then computing came up, let's say, for sake of the argument, after Alan Turing in the late 1940s, early 1950s. And we can probably trace this back even further to Babbage and all those things. That's fine. So we worked on computing for a long time. Organization become more complex. We started worrying about business and IT alignment. And then we had a big wave of process management and Lean and Six Sigma in the 1990s, late 1990s, and the 2000s. Everyone was worried about processes. Well, process is everything. We don't have to worry about data and systems. That problem will solve itself. Exaggerating a little bit, but that seemed to be the view to some extent. And I think that is changing. I think we are realizing processes will change. As you said, agility. What is working today will not work tomorrow. System will change if even especially in the cloud era. We have one vendor and move on to the next. Who cares? Data is going to be with us for a long time. And we take it from one system to the next. It's the record of what we've done with our organization. It's the basic ingredient for our processes. It's also the outcome of our processes. So I think we're starting to learn as a group of professionals that we need to look at the bigger picture. Say it's not just processes, it's not just systems, it's also data. And we have a lot of catching up to do in the data space. It used to be the DBA somewhere in the basement worrying about, is third normal form really going to be good enough for me, or do I need boycott normal form, or maybe I'm going to go to a graph database or whatever. Do I really standardize everything on a single platform, or do I, distribute it or use something federated? Those used to be the decisions, and now we see that they have a massive business impact. A couple of examples. If you want to do anything with AI, it's going to be trained by data. Where's the data going to come from? And we hear these stories that the big LLMs that we talk about now are so data hungry. We're already out of data. Oh my God, that's huge. What if you train an LLM for your own organization? At some point, it's going to be out of data. How are we going to deal with that? If we want to optimize our processes, let's go back to the 1990s and the early 2000s. What are we going to look at? We're going to look at performance of our processes, meaning we look at data. If we're going to improve products for customers, what are we going to look? We're going to look at data again.
Mhm.
It's literally everywhere, and that realization is hitting us. And the funny thing is, it's been staring us in the face for many, many years. When we going back history, when we started with business and IT alignment, we had two pillars: the business and IT.
Mhm.
And not much later, the third column came in the middle: the business, information, and IT. Uh, there were different words, but it was information that sat smack in the middle. It's been staring us in the face for decades, I want to say, and we finally got the lesson, and it seems that we're catching up now.
Mhm. Well, and there's also a book, Bas, that you published not too long ago, right? A quite comprehensive book on data management. Title of the book is Data in Context, Models as Enablers for Managing and Using Data. So would
Correct.
you maybe want to share a few highlights? So what's in the
Yeah,
book
of
and what's
course.
maybe
So
most
let's start
crucial
at the
from
birth
an
of the book.
architecture perspective?
And let's start at the birth of the book. This really came from a frustration. And that sat really deep somewhere in the core here. Because I noticed that skills around handling data seem to be fading from the market.
Hmm.
Sure, we can all buy a self-service BI tool, throw a bunch of data at it, click, 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 and we have a nice graph. But what are we really looking at? So that's fine. Sure, we can find a ton of engineers who set up a data pipeline and pull stuff from one system and force it into another system. I'm not talking about those skills. But understanding what data is, understanding what data means in different contexts. Is a customer, or is it a completely different beast in
Hmm.
another context? What kind of properties are we collecting? What kind of propositions, taking a logic stance here, do we want to store in our systems when we really start to collect data? All those really fundamental skills of understanding and structuring data such that we can manage it and can use it for value creation, it seems that that whole understanding part of it is fading from the market. And I don't see it so much in the universities anymore. I see professionals struggling with it. Sure, we have the fancy modeling tools, but what are we really doing? So that was the frustration that led me to starting on this book. And I went, on the one hand, really into the academic side and say, okay, can I find a good definition of what data really is? And we found one in the field of semiotics. So that comes from language theory, I want to say, 1920s, old stuff, but still quite relevant in today's market, I want to say. So we found those definitions, said, well, okay, let's agree that data has structure and meaning. At least it has the intended meaning. So if I structure my data, I'll try to convey some meaning, and you can observe it, and hopefully you will have the same meaning. That's the whole point of storing things in data, of course. So intended meaning and observed meaning. Okay, so if data has structure and meaning, then what does it really mean? We need a theory to structure data such that it conveys the meaning best. There's a ton of theories that I could take. I chose to go one that is close to my heart, and that's the relational model. I think it's one of the most beautiful mathematical models that we have out there. So that's the one that I took. And I showed that you can use that theory not only to design the best database, but also to understand data better. And that was my take. And that's the first part of the book. It's all about trying to understand what is data, how do I structure data such that it conveys meaning in an efficient and effective way. Second part of the book builds on that and says, okay, fine, now we understand data. What does it mean to manage data as an asset? And there we take the DAMA DMBOK, the data management body of knowledge, again as a point of departure. And that's the framework that I rely on. And we work towards this conclusion that data management is all about managing data such that we can get value out of it, linked to all those areas in the DMBOK. And that requires, in my perspective, a modeling approach, hence the subtitle of the book.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks, Bas. So maybe a quick shift to a final topic. Since you also teach at a business school, right? I'm keen to get to know your view on architecture, specifically the more business architecture oriented pieces, if you like, being taught at higher education institutions. So, from your point of view, is it sort of, let's say, sufficiently and effectively addressed and covered in what is being taught at higher education institutions? And let me add another question in that context. Whether or not this is the case, what do you think? What is it that graduates should have learned about enterprise architecture, business architecture, and so on? So, what do you think is most important for someone having studied business administration, information systems, or a similar field to take away from university, from any higher education institution as it relates to architecture? Any
Yeah, I
thoughts
think
on
I
this?
already answered your last question. So that broad perspective and connecting the dots and navigating the levels of complexity in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Being able to do that and find the counterpoint to arguments just to see where really the tension is in an architecture, and that fundamental skill that architects have or should have.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what people should take away from higher ed. Um, Regardless, I don't care about methods, methodologies, and all those things, and not anymore. That used to be a big thing 10, 15 years ago. Full disclosure, I worked at one of the vendors back at the day. That has changed. I think if you have the skill to go into an organization, whether it's your own organization or when you're consulting, and you really see this puzzle about where are we in terms of how we are organized, and what are our strategic objectives, pain points, all those things, and see a pattern and a direction, and connecting the dots against the different domains, I guess, for lack of a better term. And coming up with a coherent analysis and story that helps us to propel us forward, ideally with other stakeholders. That's
Mm.
the key skill, in my
Mhm.
opinion.
So, as you said, in a nutshell, right? It's all about connecting the dots, yeah?
It's connecting the
And
dots.
looking at the whole
Yeah,
thing, right?
yeah, yeah.
Having a holistic view,
Agreed.
right?
But higher ed, that's what you asked.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure.
So I don't have a full view of what all the universities are doing in, let's say, Western Europe. I do have a bit of an understanding of what everyone is doing. And I wanna start at what we do at Antwerp Management School because I'm pretty proud of the
Mhm,
way we do it. And I will borrow a story from my colleague, Professor Verelst. It's
mhm,
also in the data book, by the way. And he essentially says there are three domains. And there's the real world domain with real organizations having real problems. That's fine. Then there's a scientific domain. That's where the universities are. And we study the real world, we develop these theories, we publish about it. Then we train students, and then hopefully, what we hope is that when they go into the real world, they use these theories and make the world a better place. Ambitious, but still. And it doesn't work that way. First, when they sign their diploma, half of what they have learned is gone, and we beat the rest out of them when they come into the workplace because theory is for the universities and we have real problems to solve. Then there's this middle world, the third domain, the heuristic domain. It's the domain of frameworks, I want to say. This is where the BISBOK, the DMBOK, all those frameworks, they live somewhere in that middle domain. And practitioners tend to use those heuristics and those frameworks a lot, and it would be really nice if they are connected to the world of theory. And so we need all three. That's the claim.
mhm,
The way we have a master in enterprise IT architecture, and the way we teach it there is that it's a executive master program. So the own organization and real world challenges, that's the starting point. And we have both a loop to the heuristics domain and a loop to the scientific domain, and the two are connected. And so we give them scientific theory and the way of thinking that we have as scientists, hoping that they bring some scientific rigor into the
mhm,
organization when they go back into the real world and solve real problems. But we also teach them about frameworks and methods and methodologies that get the job done
mhm,
rather than having to rely on those foundational theories on the scientific side.
mhm,
And I think that's really valuable. Can we improve on it? Probably. Are we talking about it? Always and constantly. But that's what we do, and I think that's a good way to go about it.
mhm. Yeah.
But you have to remember, this is an architecture program. And you also specifically asked about BAs, MBAs, and all those guys. That's different. You can't teach them architecture for what, 6 courses or something like that. It's not going to work. So I teach at a couple of MBA programs, and I'm a guest lecturer in some universities. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It seems still very much focused on how do I say this? Learning tricks, learning very specific tools, I want to say, which is maybe fine for undergrads and for bachelor students. But if you're a master student, I expect more foundational knowledge about what architecture is and have that broad perspective and the critical thinking, I want to say.
Yeah.
And I don't see a lot of that yet in the business programs. And I think that's a shame. To be honest, if I were to design a program right now, I would really have to think about how to do that because it tends to take a bit of getting your hands dirty before you get to the point where you see the value of the big picture. But I don't think we are where we want to be just yet.
Mhm. Well, I would fully agree with this. So thanks for sharing your view on this. And well, I guess it's time to wrap up. So, Bas, any final thoughts? Any particular takeaways for listeners of our
Yeah,
conversation that you would like to highlight?
there are a couple of one-liners that I tend to throw in somewhere in interviews and in papers. And one is in an increasingly digital world, we have to put the people first. I
Hmm.
think right now that's even more important than ever. Everyone is talking about AI and LLMs, and I recently saw a lecture by Giancarlo Guisardi from the University of Twente, and he spoke about maybe we should not talk about artificial intelligence, but about intelligence augmentation, so IA instead of AI, which I think is very inspirational.
Hmm.
So keep the people front and center. That's one. Second, it's in the three domains story. We need academic rigor and practical relevance. So don't forget about the science part. And the third part, let's have some fun. I mean, we're at the forefront in a time where a lot is happening. It's an exciting time to be an architect. It's an exciting time to be in our field and to help our organizations grow and mature. And hopefully we can do that in a sustainable way.
Okay, I think that's a very nice way for us to finish off this conversation. Thanks again, Bas,
You're
for taking
welcome.
the time to have this conversation with me today. It's been a really interesting chat. Yeah, many thanks again.
You're welcome.